A very good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second day of the 13th edition of Apeejay Kolkata Literary Festival. At AKLF, we engage with the literary world and celebrate books, music, art, films, and more with the finest creative minds in the nation and globally. AKLF 2022 also marks the beginning of the centenary year celebrations for the iconic Oxford bookstores. Our first session today is Vir Sanghvi and Seema Goswami, Unfiltered. Now that you already know from the title, our speakers for this session are none other than Vir Sanghvi and Seema Goswami. One of the best known Indian journalists of his generation, Vir Sanghvi's career straddles print, television, books, and new media. He has won the Rajiv Gandhi Award, the Lokmanya Tilak Award, the Contro Award for Best Food Literature Book in the World for Rude Food, and innumerable TV prizes. He's here at AKLF 2022 with his autobiography that we discuss, A Rude Life, the memoir. With him is a journalist and author, Seema Goswami. Her book, Woman on Top, written to help women in workplace, has been translated into several Indian languages. Madam Prime Minister, written by her, offers an insider's view of how things move at the top of the government and gives us a rare peek into the underbelly of the TV news business. The moderator for our session is Shreya Punj. She is the commissioning editor at Penguin Random House, India. Shreya indulges in studying publishing trends across the world, discovering new voices, developing ideas with authors, acquiring them, and publishing books. Let us quickly jump into the session while I request the audience to type their comments and thoughts in the comment section. Thank you so much. Over to Shreya.
Thank you so much. Hi, Vir and Seema. Good afternoon, and good afternoon to our lovely audience who's chosen to be a part of this conversation. And welcome. I'd like to thank AKLF and Oxford Bookstores for organizing this wonderful book fest. And we're also happy to be here discussing books and everything that makes them, especially on a wintry Saturday afternoon. Now, Vir and Seema, I've worked with both of you last year, and it's been an absolute honor. I look forward to having an unfiltered chat with you, which is something we've always had. And the first question I have in a series of questions is, you're both writers, you've both been journalists, and you've now both in the same year brought out your books. How different or how similar are your writing processes? And please spare us no details.
Okay, I'm going to take that. I'm going to start off. First of all, Shreya, thank you for doing this. You edited both our books so brilliantly. So I think both of us owe you a huge debt. And thank you also to the festival for inviting us. Seema is from Calcutta, and I had a Calcutta phase in my life. So the Apeejay group is a large part of our lives. I've known 2 generations of the Paul family. The Oxford bookstore is a very important landmark in Calcutta. Generally, when I was in Calcutta, I found if I got into arguments with people and they would say something completely nonsensical, I would say, well, where do you learn that? And they would say Oxford, and people would come away a little frightened and intimidated. Of course, they didn't mean the university, they meant the bookstore, but I was only to discover that much later. So thank you, Apeejay Group, for inviting us. Thank you to the festival, and thank you, Shreya, for agreeing to do this. This is the second time you've helped us after doing such a brilliant job editing our books. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Vir and Seema. Means a lot.
All of us. Now, I'll start briefly with your question, and then Seema can hop in. Our writing processes are very, very different. They're probably as different as possible. I am a sort of nakrebaz. I have to sit and write in a concentrated fashion. And if people interrupt me, even to say, do you want some tea? I say, my train of thought has gone. And how can you do this? And fired now. I don't care. Now I'm going to give it up and I'll start tomorrow. Seema is very practical, very pragmatic. She sits down to write. She'll do it. Then she'll come back and she'll say, this para I want to change, or I've got 2 paras left. I'll do a conclusion. So she's obviously got more mind space than me because she keeps it all in her head. I sort of sit down and this ray of light strikes me. And if the ray of light is interrupted in any way, I throw a hissy fit.
I think that's about, but on the practical aspect, Vir always writes longhand. So I think that actually is it kind of helps the writing process, because after you write longhand and then it's typed out and then you look at it. So there's a lot of filtering that happens even in the editing process when you're just looking at the typed copy, you make changes or whatever. Whereas I write on my laptop. So, even mechanically, the process is different, because if you're writing on a laptop, you're kind of editing as you go. So sometimes that's not such a good thing, because with me especially, I keep going back and rereading stuff and re-editing stuff, and I have to consciously tell myself, like, it's time to move on, I'll come back to it at some other point, rather than continuing to kind of focus on one particular aspect. So I think even technically that there's a lot of difference.
That's really enlightening. But I want to also understand, is it different when you were writing Seema, you've written 3 books now. When you're writing books versus when you're writing your weekly column for Brunch? Or do you follow the same process, and that is like how we'd explain that it's all in your head and then it's just a matter of practically putting it down?
Well, with my books, the first book was, of course, nonfiction. So that was more like magazine articles, which I could put together, because I had just, I used to work for a magazine which came out as part of a newspaper. But when I started writing fiction, it just helped me if I had the basic structure in mind, if I had separated it into chapters and I knew vaguely what was going to happen in each chapter and how the story was going to progress. That doesn't mean I stuck to it very closely, but I think that having that little skeletal structure in your mind when you're writing fiction really helps. And of course, we wrote an autobiography, which was very different.
But see, the difference basically between writing fiction and writing non-fiction, at least for me, is that in fiction, you create characters. So you have to, throughout the duration of the book, keep those characters in your head, wonder how they will respond in any given situation. In nonfiction, you don't have to do any of that shit. No? You just write what you felt and that's it. Like if you read Seema's books, which you probably read the first one, which you did not read, but it's very nice. The heroine in this one, and she's also, well, she's not really the heroine, it's some lead character, but she's certainly the heroine of this one, Asha Devi, I think takes on a life that I don't even know if Seema had in mind when she created it.
That's true. I think characters kind of take a life of their own on the page, and then you kind of go along with it so far as it is possible.
But I think that process isn't shown when you, for example, sent me the full manuscript, because it felt like it had appeared all at once in one go, because nothing seemed to spill over. It was such a tight narrative. And just yesterday, I met a friend of mine for a cup of coffee, and both with our negative reports. And she had read Madam Prime Minister, and she said that she finished it in 2.5 hours.
Oh,
and
wow.
this is a person who does not read too much fiction.
Wow.
So I asked her what made her stay hooked. And this is what she said. She said each chapter leaves you wanting for more, which is something she's also said for Vir's book, because she said, why has he written such short, crisp chapters? I want to read more. Why hasn't he? Why is the narrative so crisp? And I said, well,
it's 62 chapters, so it's not a small book.
It's a bloody great book, no? So if
it is hefty.
Look at that.
Yeah, if I was going to write more, I have to do a 6-volume series or something.
Yeah, but no, for the expanse of the Indian polity that you've covered, you've not wasted time, putting people in context. You have just told what was, giving the reader the benefit of the doubt that they knew what was happening as well. Like assuming
and there's always Google, Shreya.
Exactly. Like very few authors accord a certain degree of intelligence to the reader, which I think both of you do, wherein you don't spend time delving into what is happening, but rather showing what happens, which is, I think, really
actually, it's funny you say that, because when I did my first book, which was Racecourse Road,
Yes.
which was set in what is now called Lok Kalyan Marg, but is basically the Prime Minister's house in Racecourse Road.
Yes.
My editor at that point kept asking me to put in more and more information about things. And in retrospect, I think it just slowed down the narrative a bit, and which is why I kind of avoided it in Madam Prime Minister, saying that if people want more information, there are 101 places to get it. I don't really need to put it inside my book, which is basically fiction.
But
you're a rare exception, because you were happy in my book to let the narrative go along. But generally, the job of editors seems to be, in a way to make themselves useful. If you say, by then it was clear that Mayawati had let Vajpayee down, you'll get a comment saying, who is Mayawati? Give a little background of her life. Please describe her. How tall is she? How old? Everybody bloody knows. Yeah, why waste time with this kind of stuff?
Exactly. And like Seema said, there's always Google. So please use that generously and use the right resources even on Google, because misinformation is abound. Now, Seema, you made a very interesting comment saying yours is fiction. But I remember the first time we discussed the manuscript as a whole, and I said, is this person so-and-so? Is this person so-and-so? And you said, you know what? It's a mix of many people, but yes, primarily yes. So, and in Vir's book, of course, there's a lot of detail about, as there's a song in Hamilton which says, I want to be in the room where it happens. And it seems like you both were in almost all the rooms where things were happening when they were happening.
Him more than me.
Yes. I know, but as I said, 22 mentions of you in a lot of important places.
Yeah.
So I want to know how much of your book, Seema, was informed from the being so close to the politics of it all. And how did you toe the line between, borrowing from reality versus creating your own?
Well, like you said about the characters, nobody is actually, you can't say A is B or C is D or whatever. But what does happen is that when you're part of the political world, I used to do a lot of political journalism earlier. I covered general elections. I interviewed a lot of politicians, some of whom became friends or whatever. Little snippets of people kind of stick with you. And then when you sit down to write, they say, write what you know. And what you know is the people around you. You do unconsciously or even consciously pick up from their lives, pick up maybe from their mannerisms, pick up maybe from their speech intonations or whatever, and it all becomes part of your book. But I think in my book, the story is completely fictional because it's set in the near future, because there's no, Manmohan Singh and Narendra Modi has come and gone. And there's, it's not set in this particular thing, which gave me a lot of freedom to kind of write a story, because I didn't want it to get bogged down in, these kind of political battles and, right-wing nationalism and, pseudo-secularism and all of that. So I tried to tell a story outside of that context in the hope that the story is what appeals to people, not just the politics.
Right. But that does shine through. The story is the star of the book. I mean, you're instantly gripped by this young woman who is now the Prime Minister of India. And she doesn't have even, I think, a moment's peace throughout the book. And I felt quite bad for her, and which made me look at other prime ministers slightly more sympathetically. If this is what she had to face in a fictional world, I shudder to imagine what it's like in the real world, which is something Vir has covered. So, I mean, in that way, there's a lot of similarities in your book, which is that you both look with a lot of detail into Delhi's political landscape. Would you care to comment on that, Vir? How, I mean, in your book, you've covered, I think, almost every prime minister of significance, because as you say, some of them were, you didn't like them.
And some like Deve Gowda have no significance also.
Exactly, which is why I said some. Yes.
Yeah, no, but see, mine is quite easy to write. I just sort of sit down and I say, and then I saw this, and then Deve Gowda invited me to breakfast, and then he said, I've not had a bath, and then I left, whatever. So that's easy. Whereas what she's done is, say, we went to have breakfast with Deve Gowda. She's taken what the breakfast room was like. She's taken what the atmosphere in the Prime Minister's house is like. For instance, most people don't know that there are 3 different bungalows that constitute the Prime Minister's house, that all of them have staff, that they run a kitchen, that at any given time, everybody can have a gourmet meal at the Prime Minister's house. Often they get food ordered from nearby hotels, which the taxpayer pays for, by the way. And therefore, there's a sense of really being at the center of the action when you are at Racecourse Road. Now, I didn't write that because I just wanted the story to go along. But in Seema's book, you do get that sense. So she was able to take things that I was not, because I just wanted to move my plot along, which is my plot here being my little life. But in her case, she was able to set the scene, take the sense of different houses, take the sense of what the rooms were like, take the sense of what it is like to travel with SPG when the Prime Minister goes abroad. And in Man Prime Minister, there's a bit about the Prime Minister going to Davos. And I've been to Davos, and it's remarkably true. It's exactly how it happens. Now, I'm, as it is, not very patient with when it comes to writing description or creating atmosphere, etc. So all of that is Seema's area, and she's done it brilliantly.
But I would disagree there, Vir, because in one chapter you mentioned about being both of you celebrating Diwali at 7 Racecourse Road, and you've chosen to talk about the time when you went there when Vajpayee was in power.
Yeah.
And there's this. Yes, you are right. You are short on descriptions because you told us how Vajpayee was like.
I haven't told you that they had the Diwali dinner at number 3 Racecourse Road in the lawn, or that they had a fireworks display some distance from the lawn, that Vajpayee sat on the porch, then he came and joined them. So all that stuff with Seema.
Please tell us what else have you left, because this is far more interesting.
But all this stuff is Seema's area. They sort of create the atmosphere. Mine is, so I had dinner with Vajpayee, so we spent Diwali, and then he went the next day to such and such place. So mine is very cut and dried. Hers is much more atmospheric.
That is very true. So guys, if you want to get a full sense of the government, please buy a copy of Vir's book from Oxford and Seema's, both Racecourse Road and Madam Prime Minister. Combine them two and you will know exactly what goes on in the Prime Minister's house and the Parliament. So this has been most fun. Now, I also want to know, again, Vir, this is something you've mentioned very briefly, as to how you met Seema, which is at an interview. How was that experience? I want Seema to tell us, because Vir, you covered that whole thing in 4 sentences, and I have them in front of me.
Lies and lies, but go ahead. Tell what you claim happened. Yeah.
5 sentences.
No, it's actually it's funny because I had just passed out of college, and I had given the civil services exam, and I was waiting for the results, and I saw this advertisement asking for sub-editors at Sunday magazine. And so I answered it because I was doing nothing. I thought I'll do it for like 6-8 months before I kind of go. And so I did a test, and then I was called for an interview, which was conducted by Vir and by Avik Sarkar, who is like the big boss at Anand Bazar Patrika. And of course, in those days, there was no Google. So whatever information I had about Sunday told me that the editor of Sunday was a man called Shubhabrato Bhattacharya. So I went for the interview, and I sat through thinking that I was being interviewed by Avik Sarkar and Shubhabrato Bhattacharya. And the interview went well, I thought, though he says I was very arrogant and obnoxious. I don't remember that. And frankly, I don't think he remembers that either.
I remember it in detail, yeah.
And so thankfully, I never called him Mr. Bhattacharya in the interview. In any case, long story short, I got the job and then I joined. Even then, I didn't know he was Vir Sanghvi, by the way. About a month or so into the job, we got a telex from Delhi, which was signed Vir. So I turned to another colleague of mine who had been there for a couple of years, and I said, "Who is this Vir?" So she said, "What are you saying? He's the editor." I said, "Oh, isn't the editor Shubhabrato Bhattacharya?" So she said, "No, he's left. Vir is the editor now." So that's how I got to know that it was actually him who did my interview.
So can you imagine working in an office for a month, a small office, 20 people, and not knowing the name of your boss and not caring? I mean, if that is not a classic definition of arrogance, what is?
I can relate. I mean, if this were a work from home environment,
not. We were in the office.
Seema was way ahead of her time. Not knowing who the boss was.
No,
I knew who the boss was. I just thought he was a different person.
She was just very confident. I remember from the first time she walked in, and her version is slightly colored, but I remember she came in for the interview and she was just so super confident and treated us with such contempt that I think we were all completely flawed. I mean, little stupid things. Like we'd say, "What are you use on the defamation bill?" And she would say, "I think you'll find it's called the anti-defamation bill." You know, this kind of nonsense.
Okay, that I remember saying.
All right. When she left, Avik Sarkar and I both looked at each other and he said, "What do you think?" So I said, "Very pushy Punjabi." He said, "Yeah, but you need that in a reporter." So I said, "You're right." So we hired her.
That's wonderful. So then how did, you guys, did you date? How did this happen? How did the loving couple whom we now see on Instagram, at least I obsessively see, and I often very, very nicely tell anybody who will care to listen, I've worked with both of them, So how did that journey transform?
We worked together for a long time. And I think we didn't actually start seeing each other until about 5 or 6 years later.
Yeah.
So it was, I think we were actually friends first. I mean, first boss and, colleague. And it was a very collegial atmosphere. So there was no real hierarchy in Sunday in that sense. It was a small team and we all kind of worked together.
And you called each other by their first names, assuming you knew what somebody's name was, which she did not, but go ahead.
So I think after about, I think it helps when you're friends first and then you kind of get into a relationship because you've already laid a kind of foundation for being together and you have lots of things in common. And also you have the same interests, whether it's reading or, stuff like that, which always helps. So I think it was like a gradual process. It certainly wasn't like a...
Also, if there's somebody who's intellectually very accomplished and is super confident and is not at all intimidated by the fact that you're older and more senior in the organization and is incredibly intelligent and makes a thing out of winning every argument. There's something very I find exciting about that kind of person because it challenges you and it engages you at all levels, which at least for me was the attraction.
Lovely. That's so nice to hear. But this is what you said in the book, which is I was 31 and for all her smugness, she didn't even know who I was. And I thought, because she spoke to you as if you were misguided elderly people. And I remember when I read this for the first time, I laughed so hard because I could see this happening in front of me and this could happen to actually anybody even today. More so today because, like I said, we're hardly even meeting people.
Yeah, true.
So thank you so much for being so open with that story. I'm sure it's brought readers great joy. And for those of you who still haven't brought their books, please do. I mean, it's full of all of these interesting insights, both in fiction and non-fiction. Now, I want to move on to something more serious. I mean, this is Unfiltered and it does demand a certain, at least from the both of you, people who've been reporting and who've been writing for so many years now, the media landscape. And I know you've been asked these questions a lot of times, but since this is Unfiltered, I hope you shall do justice to our theme. I want to understand how has, like you just said, that Sunday was a collegial environment and throughout a rude life, we see glimpses of various kinds of newsrooms, various kinds of, whether it's HT or whether it's Star, the dynamics seem to keep changing. So I first want to ask this to Seema. Mm-hmm. How, in your opinion, has the media landscape changed since the time you started as a journalist to now? And please spare us no detail, as I said.
Well, I think when it comes to newspapers, I don't think there's been such a major change. I think newspapers are still reporting the news more or less the way we used to in the old days. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more of technology involved. There's certainly a lot more happens. So there's you have to constantly, with websites coming up, you have to constantly update. So the kind of leisurely, slightly laid back news environment we had when I first joined the business has gone. It's far more frenetic. It's far more. But I think what has changed is television, because when television started out, it was in the news business. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, now the news television is in the entertainment business. So it's kind of changed a lot. It's just become, shouty debates and, people trying to sensationalize things. There's no real reporting going on over there. So I think those newsrooms have definitely changed a lot. What do you think?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. The first is that Indian newspapers were, let's face it, really bad. And they improved, I think, through the 90s, but mostly at the beginning of the 21st century, when we really became proper newspapers. Even now, an Indian newspaper is so thin, it's like 1/8 of the size of a British paper and 1/20th the size of the New York Times or whatever. So there isn't that much you can put into it. Nor is there any money, nor is there any budget. I was talking to Vir Sanghvi, my old boss, the other day, and he was talking about a long story about a climber who went missing in Everest. And the New York Times, to cover that story, sent 2 people, one of them Pulitzer Prize winner, and they spent 2 months in Calcutta just finding out. And it appeared it was one story. Now, we will never, ever have the money to be able to do that, however interesting the story was. So always Indian journalism, compared to, say, the West, has been journalism in a hurry, getting by on very little. The contrast was with television. When television started, I remember around 2005, 2006, when it was really at its peak, I remember saying to Barkhadat, who was then with NDTV, that I envied what they were doing because Indian newspapers were nowhere near the best when it came to the world. But I thought Indian television was pretty good. It was pretty much world class. Reporters went out, reported stories, etc. I mean, I spoke too soon because Indian television now is probably the worst in the world. Something has happened, and it's not a shortage of money or whatever. It's just a desire to do tabloid television rather than to report the news. And unfortunately, the audiences love it. So the TRPs are there. And there's, I think, also a national mood change that television reflects much more quickly than, say, the newspapers. In the old days, television drew its roots from the newspapers. Now it doesn't. The closest parallel to a news channel is not a newspaper or a magazine. It's Twitter. It's those kind of values that it represents. The traditional media or the MSM or whatever you want to call us, all of us, while we oppose the government, etc., we had that broad sense of there being one India, of there being one national identity. And though, for instance, Manmohan Singh was brought down basically by the media, which wrote about him again, we still believed that we were doing this in the interests of the nation. What you now have is no one sense of India. You have at least two Indias, 80-20 to quote Yogi Adityanath, or many other Indias. Almost everything, if you watch any of the news channels, is us and them. It's the brave warriors of the news channels who, after they've taken the briefing from the Prime Minister's office, say they are fighting the Lutians Delhi or the lobby or whatever. So just as Twitter has a us and them mentality, the news channels also have an us and them mentality. They spend their time not defending any unified conception of India, but some very narrow conception of an India that only they have and which other people do not subscribe to and therefore must be knocked down. You've seen that recently in the debate about India Gate and the flame. It's anybody who's questioned it, and you can question that decision, is being attacked as unpatriotic, brown sepoy, colonial slave. That didn't happen in mainstream media. It probably still doesn't. But it does happen a lot in Twitter, and it happens a lot, unfortunately, on news television.
So is there any news channel that you watch at all?
I try not to. I certainly don't appear on news channels any longer. But we do. On the days there are news stories, we will do a, what's the term for it? Surf, and go and see what there is. I'll get blood pressure watching some of them, but I still watch sometimes.
I think on the whole, NDTV is what we would watch.
Yeah.
And we watch a lot of CNN, BBC, and Sky News on the internet, because at least it gives you a glimpse of what a news channel should be. Because sometimes you kind of lose what it is after watching what goes as news channels in India.
Right.
But basically, if you I do few people at least to find out what's happening. If you follow Sanghvi Twitter, you don't need to watch most news channels because it's the same content.
Absolutely. In fact, Sanghvi News Twitter is great at also getting the New York Times to feature.
That's right. That's right. As an enemy. Yeah, it's enemy of our nation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that one photograph that went viral, which turned out to be a fake.
Yeah.
It was so true. It was so near correct that even I was taken aback for a second, saying, what happened to the New York Times? Did somebody get kidnapped? But okay, so I've made a note of the news channels one can watch safely, while others I almost always avoid. Now, in your book, there's this one section which caught my fancy, which is that.
Can I just stick with that news channel thing? I think one of the good things about Seema's book, one of the things I enjoyed most, and the people I've spoken to who read it have enjoyed most, is that while there's a lot about the Prime Minister's office and a lot about politics and coalitions, there's a lot about news channels. And as somebody who's worked for news channels and has been there on the inside, it's absolutely true. That's exactly how news decisions are made. That's exactly how positions are taken. And it has very little to do with right or wrong or to do with news. And I enjoyed that because people don't on the whole write about that, do they, Seema? Not with any degree of authority. No. People like me will sit and fulminate to you about how bad they are, but nobody really gives you the insight. And one of the strengths of both books, I think, is the insight you get in television news.
Actually, that was my favorite bit to write to, because all the angst I felt just came out in those.
No, but that's what brought both the reporters to life, because behind, once they're in front of the camera, of course, you're expecting a certain performance from them. One needs to be understanding and portray, performative feminism, whereas the other needs to come across as someone who's grilling down the prime minister on issues that are important to the nation. But you take a step back, and that's what you've done. You've shown us the humanity in these people and the way they change sides, which I will not reveal what happens, but the way things turn. And as the memes say, turntables, turntables. That was, I think, very interesting, because that is where both reporters showed a certain degree of independent thought and emotion. Which is what I was coming to, actually, because it was actually a lead to the question where you have mentioned, Veer, that the Telegraph had always published a Sunday magazine, but this very successful graffiti avatar had been conceived of and was edited by Seema, which led to some interesting moments at home. Now, what are these interesting moments that you refer to but have not elaborated upon? Seema, if you remember any, please do let us know.
See, the Telegraph had always had a Sunday magazine. It was one of the first papers to have a Sunday magazine. But I think it's fair to say that as time went on, it had got, let me put this tactfully, not as good as it should have been. So I think Avik Sarkar realized this, and Seema was told, shifted it out to Sunday, and he said, we have this slot, you've got to do this magazine, you've got to reinvent it, give it a new name, give it a new identity. So she did that, and it was called Graffiti. And I don't know if it still exists. Does it exist?
Yeah, I think it does exist.
Yeah. And it was a huge success. Now, the HT went to Calcutta.
No, I don't think it does. I think it shut down. I'm not sure.
Okay. The HT went to Calcutta, and we had to compete with the Telegraph. And everybody, all market research and everything we did, showed us that the key reason the Telegraph was so popular, at least over the weekends, was graffiti. So we had no choice but to do a competitor to graffiti, which is how Brunch came about. Brunch was originally a Calcutta-only product, and we did it solely to take on graffiti. So here was I living with Seema, plotting ways in which to undermine graffiti, and here she was editing graffiti and plotting how to outwit us.
Seema, how was your experience? I mean, again, like we described.
They want competition.
Oh, really?
Oh.
Well, you have to understand.
So good to be with someone who's not at all arrogant.
You know, in those days, Calcutta, I mean, I'm sure it's different now, but in those days, Telegraph was really the only game in town. So
Right.
HT didn't really count in Calcutta. It was a big deal in Delhi, but we were not in Delhi. So the Delhi market didn't really matter to us. What mattered to us was Calcutta, where we were the main player. I mean, let's not kid about it.
Yeah, absolutely. But even now, I mean, if you go on Twitter, the only newspaper that seems to be showing us fine in terms of it is the Telegraph. And it gives me great joy to see that at least somewhere, although it also makes me...
And I love the headlines.
I love their headlines. They are absolutely bang on. And I love the wordplay. I love how they're clever with it, yet they make a huge impact.
Yeah.
And
it's like crossword puzzle clues. No? You have to read twice to figure out what the hell is going on.
yes, because it can fool you into thinking that they are on your side if you happen to be on the other side. Yes, on the Sanghvi side. Now, you've also both met the Dalai Lama. And I wanted to bring about this as well, because I thought it was one of the most interesting. It's a lead up to how, Seema, you always accompanied Veer on his shoots. I don't know if you were accompanying by your own volition or whether he was dragging you along, but it seemed like you wanted to be there. So how was your experience meeting the great Dalai Lama?
Actually, we met the Dalai Lama twice. So the first time we met him was for a Hindustan Times interview, which was a print interview.
Right.
And on that occasion, I kind of just tagged along because I wanted to meet him. And it was quite a revelation, because you have this kind of image in your mind of this holy man who's going to be holier than thou. And he was just such a mischievous presence, and he was such fun, and he was so lighthearted about it all. And it was a great experience. And then many years later, we went to Dharamsala to interview him for his CNN TV 18 show.
Yes.
And that was amazing also, because you saw him inside his whole milieu with, people lining up and trying to fall at his feet. And of course, he wasn't comfortable with that. He was visibly uncomfortable with that. And again, he was like so amazing. Like, he came up and he pulled my cheeks, and he pulled the beard of our Sadaji cameraman, which I was wondering how it would go down, but he just seemed to mind. And he was like a child, almost. So it was an amazing experience. And the interview was good fun too, actually.
It was a good interview.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the first one, which we did for the Hindustan Times, which was, I thought, the better one of the two interviews, though it was for print. Seema came along only because she wanted to meet the Dalai Lama, and he was quite happy. By the time we did the second one, Seema had become my de facto producer and director. What happens now with television studios, and now, though, of course, there's no question of anyone doing anything, this is all done on Zoom. But originally, when you went on a shoot, not only do you get at least 2 cameramen and probably a sound man, you got a director, and the director set up the shot and did it. As budgets began to be squeezed, they started sending just 2 cameramen, then say just 1 cameraman, and they wouldn't bother sending a director. And usually the cameraman was picked by lottery almost. So you had some good people and you had some really pathetic people. So Seema, by then, who'd got quite used to seeing me on television, sort of broadly took over. And pretty much everything I did on the road, Seema was the de facto director. She would arrange the shot. She would look at the lighting. She would make herself very unpopular with the camera people because she would say, you don't know how to light this shot, do it. But it all worked to my advantage because I could be the nice guy and smile and call them and pat them on the back, etc. Whereas Seema was this horrible person saying, don't you know how to light this light reflecting off his jowls? What's wrong with you, etc. So it really worked to my advantage.
So she really made sure that you looked amazing on screen. So
yes, why when people meet me in real life, they say, okay, that's what you look like.
So coming to this lovely partnership and camaraderie that you've always had, right from your first meeting, which was the interview, to now this session, I again go back to the the way we as an audience interact with you on Instagram more, because I think Twitter has become a very political.
Yeah.
It's almost like a workplace now, whereas Instagram is, I think, where you both seem much freer and relaxed since you're traveling together and enjoying great food at home now safely. So in the book also, where you mentioned about marriage and partnership, and while you have given your thoughts in about 2 paragraphs, I want to understand from Seema how this journey with Vir has been like for you, Seema.
Well, it's been interesting, certainly. It's it's fun because we can do things together because we have similar interests. We both love traveling. We both love cooking. We love experimenting with cuisines. We like watching the same shows, which is not often the case with most couples because there's always a kind of tussle over who controls the remote.
Absolutely.
And we read a lot of similar books, though he reads more non-fiction than I do. I'm more of a thriller person.
Yes.
But I think it helps if you have like a certain commonality of interests because it kind of helps you, stay together.
That's the version. I can give you my version if you like.
Yes,
of course. Version is slightly different, which is it is not an equal relationship. Everything I write first turns up on my phone. My guy types it. I then correct it, and I often rewrite large chunks of it. It then goes to Seema, who usually tells me it's not very good, or this is not wrong, etc. Which I'm happy to do. Everybody needs an editor, and my copy is almost always better because of that. But when Seema writes, I don't get to see the copy. She doesn't really ask my opinion. The last column I had to fight to see before it went in. The one before that, she refused to show me. The book also, she showed me only towards the end, only to ask what I thought of it. And when I said it was very, very good, she paid attention, at least because it was nice. The first one I saw right at the end, and I said that I liked the book a lot. I thought it was the first authentic presentation of the past winters of Delhi, but I don't think she cared very much what I thought. Nonsense. In the kitchen, for instance, Seema does most of the cooking. I am rarely invited to give suggestions. And on the rare occasions when I cook, most often she doesn't eat my food saying she doesn't like it. This is the truth. We had all those glamorous Instagram images.
Whatever you make does look quite delicious. And I've often thought of WhatsApping you saying, can I send my driver for some things, please? But then we make the same thing at home because we are so tempted by the lovely food.
She's really a good cook because we've been ordering so much because I've been using my Instagram page to promote people who are doing delivery, etc. And yet the best meals I've had are the ones Seema's made.
Oh, wow. Okay, thank you.
Then we're coming to the best. Which one do you like more, Racecourse Road or Madam Prime Minister?
Oh, Madam Prime Minister, a long way. I mean, Racecourse Road, see, although she says we like the same shows and all that, there are some shows that she loves which I don't watch. I don't watch. This is
Us. You don't watch. Yeah.
Great.
This is Us is lovely.
And yeah, so these are all girly shows, right? These are all
because
girly.
he doesn't like shows that make you cry.
Yeah.
And that show is full of, you need a box of tissues.
And there are things that I watch that she watches on sufferance or doesn't like. Say the Justice League movie. You didn't even watch that, right?
No, I saw it. I saw it.
My God, how long? You must be really mad.
Yeah, I'm not a big
the DC world does make longer movies. I'm sorry.
So but she's not part of it. So there is a difference in approach. I thought that a lot of the parts I loved about Racecourse Road were the political and authentic parts. There were bits which were about human relationships and all that, which, well, of course, wonderful. The whole book is wonderful, but I didn't like so much. Madam Prime Minister, on the other hand, is sort of edge of your seat excitement. No, from as your friend said, from the moment you start reading it, you really can't put it down. So easily my favorite.
So
basically, if there's any human emotion, he thinks it's slowing the plot down.
Yeah.
But in a thriller, I tend to agree there, because in Madam Prime Minister,
listen to the editor.
Even when the pace of the book seems to slow down, when you're looking at the cabinet meetings, when you're looking at the behind the scenes, games that politicians play in terms of whether it is the elections that are happening and how he's trying to, I will not go into details, but even when the words seem to bring the plot to a standstill, to be inside a room, there is so much happening. And I think it's not the emotions which slows things down, but it's their thought process which seems to accelerate the plot even more. Yeah. Because it's a frenzy. Just how many calculations Asha has to make just to get her cabinet right. I found that fascinating. And it offers so much insight into how much the Prime Minister has to listen to various advisors in appointing the right people. And then again, to not be sure of them because, you feel like an outsider. So I thought the way that the government has been picturized was amazing. Now, Seema, since you and I love thrillers, in fact, when we were designing the book, we were looking at thrillers. Can you recommend for the audience the last one that you absolutely loved?
Oh my gosh, which is the last thriller I read?
Daniel Silva.
No, can I just look through my Kindle? You tell me which is the last thriller.
Okay, I like, what's his name? Cummings, Charles Cummings, I think his name is, who writes Le Carré-esque thrillers. I like his stuff a lot. Maybe he's not Charles Cummings, he's something Cummings. I used to like Charles McCarry, but he died uncooperatively and therefore not writing any more books. I used to enjoy Le Carré's books. And both of us, Seema introduced me to Daniel Silva.
Yeah, I love that.
Which I now like. And it's always thrilling, it's entertaining, and it's formulaic, so you're never very surprised.
Well, the last one I read, which I really enjoyed a lot, was by Shari Le Pen, called Not a Happy Family. Have you read that?
I love Shari Le Pen. I haven't read that one, but I love her work.
It was great. I mean, it's a murder mystery, of course, and it is formulaic, but the pace of the book was really good.
But there is something to be said about a formulaic book which delivers the satisfaction you're craving. So all the formulas, as long as
I still enjoy reading or watching Agatha Christie, even though that's as formulaic as it gets.
She invented the
something comforting about it.
You should know about Seema that she rereads books. When she's feeling low, she rereads Georgette Eyre, which she read as a child. Is this true or not?
In fact, I reread another one just 2 weeks ago. So whenever it's depressing and I'm thinking of the lockdown, I read Georgette Eyre.
Oh, lovely. Okay. I think it's time for us to wrap up the session. Okay. Do we have any questions from the audience? I can't seem to see them here.
Do we even have time?
We have 8 minutes.
We do have about 5-6 minutes, but I cannot on the chat see any questions. Well, in that case, I shall assume that we have dispensed with our duties, entertained the crowd. So I just received a response saying, no, but a lot of congratulatory messages. Well, congratulations, Seema and Vir, on delivering 2 amazing, entertaining, informative books that I think any reader, like we just discussed, for the non-fiction, please read. Get yourself a copy of A Rude Life. And for fiction, please get yourself a copy of Madam Prime Minister and Racecourse Road as well. all from Oxford bookstores. You can either get yourself a copy from their physical stores or online as well via their website.
Can I just add, Shreya, that Oxford bookstore means a lot to me because I grew up in Calcutta and I spent many, many hours there just browsing books, even when I couldn't afford to buy too many of them. So it's really amazing for me to do this for Oxford bookstore. And I really wish I was in Calcutta and I could visit it and see our books on display there. It would be a very special feeling.
Hopefully very soon. And I hope that Omicron is at the fag end of its wave, and here's hoping that we can all go to Calcutta then.
I hope so.
Yeah.
And thank you again, Shreya. Thank you for
Shreya.
the magnificent job editing the books and for this conversation.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.